Hey, I'm Aaron. This is the long form version of my top 10 champ designs in League of Legends. You can watch the edited version on my YouTube channel. Here I'm going to be explaining more of my thoughts about my selections for the top 10 and some of my honorable mentions and why they didn't make it. I'm going to go into some of the concepts I talk about in the edited video in more detail. And yeah, just going to do this all unedited, one take. So you can kind of see how I started with likely and honorable and other, and kind of grouped them, and everything in other basically had no chance to make the top 10. And here are some of the things that I considered for the honorable mentions, and all of these I somewhat considered for the top 10 at some point. But yeah, let's start with the top 10 itself. We'll just go from top down. So for Jhin, I talked about Jhin a decent amount at the end of the edited video, but I think Jhin and Jinx are both pretty perfect, but I like Jhin more personally. The only gripe you could have against Jhin, I think, is that his Q might not fit too well with the rest of his abilities, but I think it's still a unique ability in his laning and his wave clear. And it bounces 4 times, so it fits with this theme. That's something that Jhin does really well. It's like he has 4 shots, he has 4 bounces on his grenade, he has 4 shots in his ultimate, and the 4th shot in both his ultimate and his clip both deal massive amounts of damage. And yeah, it's cool. He's a psychopath, or a sociopath or something, which I don't think is displayed really anywhere else in the game. Maybe Annie, I don't know. But yeah, he's awesome, and he's I think one of the only AD carries that truly encapsulates like the spell slinger ADC that people like to talk about. You could maybe consider Lucian or Xayah or maybe Sivir, but all of those characters can always auto attack, and they build some amount of attack speed. But Jhin literally can't get more attack speed, and sometimes he can't auto attack, so he's really relying on his abilities. He has maybe the coolest and best designed ultimate in the game that's super flashy and works well with like his W and his traps and stuff like that. Yeah, love Jhin. So for Jinx, I think one thing I didn't talk about in the video is Jinx's difficulty curve. Jinx is a kind of a quintessential AD carry. Like when you describe AD carry, you're basically describing Jinx, at least the classic version of an AD carry. And Jinx is decently easy to pick up. You can understand her pretty well, but she has a pretty high skill cap due to the fact that she auto attacks. She has 2 different ways of auto attacking. Her traps are pretty hard when you don't have just like hard CC to match up with them, and her ultimate is decently hard, I would say. But her ultimate is also super epic. Maybe not as cool as Jhin, but I think the Jinx R makes for cooler clips, and I think making clips and shareable moments and exciting moments is a really important part in games, especially these like live competitive games that are always running their media cycles or whatever you want to say. So Oriana's next. Oriana has a pretty low play rate, so putting her number 3 is kind of not bold, but polarizing. I don't know. But I like Oriana because she's super clean. She plays around the ball, which the ball I mentioned is something you can only do really in a MOBA, in a top-down game. Like you couldn't use the ball in like a first-person game because it would be too hard to control and stuff like that, and they really make the most use out of it. Oriana also has really cool drafting concepts where you have to both deliver the ball with something like a Tahm Kench or a Hecarim or even a Thresh or a Cho'Gath, maybe Darius, and then you have to have stuff like AoE combos to use on the ultimate once you've done it. So I think Oriana plays really well in draft. She's kind of like the marquee mage for the mid lane for if you're trying to learn mages and be a player like like a famous player like Faker or Bjergsen or even PoE. PoE is super famous for just playing mages, and like Oriana is the marquee mage, and I think just like Jinx is the marquee AD carry, you could say. If you want to be good at mages, you should be playing Oriana. Yeah, and she's decently hard. Not the hardest champion in the game, but that's fine. Draven's pretty hard, but I think it's really cool that he literally catches his axes. I mean, mechanically you have to, stand on the spot, and like then once it's finished with its animation, you get a bonus. But like visually, he's catching the axes that he's throwing back at him, which is really cool. And yeah, he has a really good theme of this gladiator who's super showboaty, and that cash in on his stacks really plays to that with all the sound design there. And he's not super frustrating to play against. Sometimes when you're newer and you're just like getting auto attacked to death, that can suck. But when you're newer, you're usually not playing against that many Dravens because newer players aren't really picking up Draven, which is maybe a mark against him, is he's a bit hard to pick up. While my mic is falling. Yeah. So for Silas, hold on. For Silas, I talked about how his W kind of worries me, and the W kind of gives him this like drain tank, which has been kind of controversial, I'd say the last year or two. And they toned it down and they put more power into the other parts of his kit, which I think are good. Silas is really strategic in draft and how you draft around what they've already picked, and then once you pick Silas, it's the enemy team's responsibility to pick around the ults that they're going to pick, which is a really cool concept in League. And like when you ban Silas, like, okay, we've picked these 3 champions already and we're halfway through the draft, do we need to ban Silas now? A lot to think about in draft, which is cool and unique. Silas is decently easy to pick up, I would say. Definitely hard to master. He has a lot of buttons. And you can use every ultimate in the game, and it's cool to think about like how does your matchup fare, not based on like your QWE, but like, is your R good on Silas? Is your opponent's R good on Silas? Like, Ryze is kind of a counter to Silas because Ryze's R isn't really good for Silas to take, and stuff like that. And like, is TF good against Silas, or is Silas with TFR just a better TF? Like stuff like that is interesting to think about. Yeah, next is Leona. Leona, I said, was the quintessential tank. When you think about tank in League, like, Leona is just the one. She doesn't die, she takes no damage, and she CCs you. She's a really good onboarding champion for new players. That's also really, like, veteran players love to play Leona and still have a lot of skill expression. She's versatile. I said that her weaknesses weren't super clear. She does have some. Like, she's weak to, like, kind of the, like, Ziggs, Zoe type of comps, and she's weak in lane to certain matchups like Thresh and Braum and stuff, but mainly she's just about being like this versatile tank that goes in most comps and pairs well with most AD carries, which I think is becoming, maybe has always been, an important concept with AD carries and supports, is like, when you're playing with random people in that lane, you want like your characters to at least be able to align at some axis and be able to play the same game. Where sometimes I feel like stuff like Samira, Soraka, that's the worst example probably, but those don't really match up too well. So yeah, being versatile with your AD carry and your support, I think, is a good design thing to follow. Gnar is next. So I mentioned that Gnar, one of his only problems is that sometimes your transformation window is awkward in solo queue, but Gnar is really fun when you're playing with a team, and when you're screaming about when you're gonna transform. Like, we got to make something happen because I'm literally like, I've queued them too much. I'm going to transform. Um, and but in solo queue it can be a little awkward with like timing when your jungler's coming, and like maybe they take a scuttle when you're about to transform, and then they come back when you're tired. It's a little awkward, but that's a really small gripe. Gnar is really cool, really skill intensive. Just surprisingly, like, he doesn't really look like it, but he is. And he's fun to lane with and not super obnoxious to play against. All right, Ezreal's next. Ezreal definitely lands the concept of easy to pick up, hard to master. Like, you can read all of his abilities even as a new player, and they're not really confusing. You know pretty much how to do it, and you can even land a lot of it. But as you play more and more Ezreal, like, even the best Ezreal player in the world is not like near the level of efficiency as, like, let's say the best, I don't know, Ziggs player in the world or something, because there's so much like you have to get to like 100% of your Qs hitting, right? And you just can't possibly do that as a human being. But you can try, and that's what's cool about Ezreal. His passive is a little weird because, like, attack speed doesn't really matter on Ezreal. Sometimes, like, having a higher or lower attack speed ratio or whatever it is, like, meaning that you can get one auto attack in faster, is good on Ezreal because it allows you to weave them in quicker. But I don't think that there isn't a better design that could be better. For Thresh is really cool. I talked about how his lantern really, like, it just creates situations that don't happen with any other champion. Like, if Thresh is in the game, like, there can be situations that don't happen, like, nothing like it with any other champion in the game, with his lantern. I did talk about how his passive is a little weird. It's like, I don't want to be like reliant on minion deaths for my support champion. I also don't want to like go out of the bush to collect these souls that barely matter. It's also a little bit too much like Senna. I know they're related, but it's still a little too similar. I think being based on kill participation and like harvesting a soul once you get an assist or a kill would be a better way for the Thresh passive to work, and like you just get more of it. And I also don't think he should just get only armor, because I don't want to pick Thresh because they have a bunch of AD. It's like, oh, Thresh gives me armor. Like, I would rather pick something else at that point, something that's, you know, really good with armor, like Taric scales with armor, or Rammus support. I don't know. I mean, most tank supports will do well against a bunch of AD. But yeah, I wish it just gave a better rounded swath of stats, or something. Like, it doesn't even have to give stats. I don't know. I guess it could give like cooldown reduction. What if it just gives you a random stat every time? Something. So Lee Sin was initially like third, and I kept knocking it down when I kept thinking of like better ways to design it. And yeah, I think you could like, I think that his recasting of the W and E is kind of unnecessary. It's necessary with the Q, but I think they got maybe a little too carried away. It's like, what if every ability could be recast? It's like, I don't think he actually needs to be designed that way, and I think it makes him more clunky. But I do think Lee Sin is so legendary, and the fact that like he's been out for so long, and we're still so like it's still some of the most hyped plays in the game are Lee Sin plays, with his like kick flashes and ward hop, you know, whatever, all that stuff. And it's super satisfying to learn. And you can even pick up Lee Sin and do simple stuff. I mean, you know, anybody can hit like the Q and slow people and then auto attack them. But like, I want to make a video about where the difficulty in champions should be in League. And Lee Sin has the difficulty in the right places. You know, you can play the champ. You know, you can use all of the abilities when you first pick him up, but like having difficulty in combos and in skill shots is where I think difficulty should be in. And Lee Sin has it in his combos, and trying to learn them and get them consistent is a rewarding process. So yeah, one of the ways you could rework Lee Sin, just as an idea, is you can make his W and E not recast. Just like work the Omnivamp into some other part of his kit. Maybe give him more attack speed or make the energy cost less on each ability because you would get less energy off of his passive. And just like make the E immediately slow. I don't know why it doesn't. Why does it like damage and then slow? It doesn't make any sense, but that's how I would change him a little bit. He doesn't really need to be changed though. All right, on to the honorable mentions. So I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. Ornn, he's just a little bit too boring to make it. He doesn't really do anything super epic. Like his R is epic and pretty hard to use, and I think Ornn is a pretty difficult champion to play, which is a challenging thing to do, is make a difficult tank. But overall, he's just a little boring. His visuals and theme are pretty perfect though. Ornn has some of the best visuals in voiceover, sound design, all that stuff in League. Scion, he has a dagger in his head, which is super cool. But yeah, Scion is also a pretty, I would say he's moderately difficult tank to play. But you can also build him as like a crit or AD if you want to play that style. And I think it's cool that he has two different styles. And yeah, he's not super frustrating to play against. Maybe his passive where he turns into a zombie is a little frustrating, but I think he has a really unique style and how he split pushes, and his R turns him into Thomas the Tank Engine Train, which is amazing and glorious. Yeah, I like Scion. Echo is the only thing that kept him off of the top 10 is that his W feels kind of random. And abilities where it like disincentivizes people to go into a certain spot pair really well with other abilities that like you can line them up and like get value out of them. So like Caitlyn, for instance, you can trap and then people walk away from the trap and it's easy to land an E or a Q on them or a full combo. But Echo doesn't really have that, and that was kind of a mark against him. But I like everything else about Echo. His R is super cool, and it's mainly where his difficulty comes from, is like getting really good like R nuke plays is pretty challenging. And his R is super unique, and he's a cool guy. Braum pretty much got off the list because he's a tad boring. Braum, I saw a Reddit poll for like the least frustrating champion to play against. In at least in the support role, and so I think he's a good design because he's a good champion and he's powerful, but he doesn't really kind of feel like that all the time. He doesn't feel epic. He's a little boring, but he's Braum, you know, he's cool. For Lucian stayed off of the list because I think the way that they reworked him and his passive, where like he gets buffed when he gets buffed, like he gets extra damage when he gets buffed by an ally, was kind of just a loose band-aid fix for him being more of a mid laner than a bot laner. It did work logistically, like they replaced Lucian with Akshan and then made Lucian a bot laner. And he's seeing a lot more play bot lane and he is more powerful, but I think it wasn't the cleanest. And it would take a lot more time and a lot more effort to do a really clean transition to where he's definitely a bot laner. But I think there's some things you could do with that, and maybe that's a different video. For Aatrox, I think Aatrox is kind of torn between, and it's kind of in his theme in general, he's torn between this demon and this blade. And his blade really comes out in his Q, and his demon comes out in his ult. But his ult's a little lame. Like, doesn't really do that much. It fears minions, which is kind of random, and like he just gets stronger. He does look cool when he Rs, though. Overall, I think some of his abilities are a little random, although they're fun to play with and even against, like his W. And I like that he is a healing champion, you know. I think a problem in League right now is there's certain champions like Samira and Yasuo that really require Oblivion Orb against them, even though they don't have any healing in their kit. But like Aatrox has a bunch of healing in his kit, and it says so right there. He doesn't need runes or items to get it, and you know that you need Oblivion Orb or Executioner's Calling when he's ahead. And so I like that about him. Moving on to Pike. Pike was kept out the list because he's pretty difficult to pick up for low to medium skill players, which is a small mark against him. Like, he shouldn't be that difficult. But he plays off his theme really well with his sound effects when he's Wing and when he's close to R'ing you. His R is really flashy and fun to use. And he has a really high skill cap. His difficulty is in the right place, although his skill floor is a little too high. Like, figuring out the combos and how to use them is fun. And he's very unique. You know, an assassin support is something that wasn't a thing before. And I think that recently on Reddit, there was a matrix posted of like the roles and the types of champions, the classes of champions, and which champion fit into that matrix. And, you know, you wouldn't have something there as an assassin support if Pike wasn't a thing. So I think that's important. Yasuo is really polarizing. I think a lot of it has to do with his healing. I think people that are super powerful even when they're super low health and like go up to 1 billion health is not the most fun to play against when it's not advertised that they're a healing based champion. He's just getting it off of runes and items. But other than that, he's super skill intensive. His win wall is pretty awesome, although I don't think it should block ultimates, especially like Ornn R. Why does that thing block Ornn R? But he's also cool to draft around in pro play. You know, you have to draft around the knockups, and having a melee AD mid is something unique. And yeah, he has a lot of stuff going for him. Ziggs, he's all about bombs. Every single one of his abilities is just bombs, and he's kind of the more whimsical side of a bomb character, and I think that's pretty cool. What's keeping him off the top 10? He doesn't really have anything that puts him on the top 10. He doesn't have any marks against him, I would say, but there's nothing pushing him over the edge. I like his R. Samira, I think, is kind of a slightly more frustrating Draven. She also has that problem with the lifesteal and the you need Oblivion Orb against her, even though she doesn't like heal. At least in her kit, it says that she applies lifesteal, so it kind of implies that you build her like a lifesteal champion. But yeah, she does have that problem. Other than that, I think she's pretty cool. She's fun to play. She's not super bad to play against, at least now. Like, I think the mini rework that they did to her was really successful. And like before she hits 6, she's actually pretty weak. But she still feels aggressive, which is cool. Like a champion that's actually weak pre-6 but is still an aggressive champion is a hard line to pull, but they did it. Viego. So Viego is like pretty controversial, but I think is actually an amazing design. I could maybe even put it in the top 10. But they would have to fix one thing, and that's that he goes invincible or like untargetable so much that it almost feels like luck if you're going to hit him or not. If you're going to hit your skill shot when he's invincible or untargetable, or when he's, you know, actually targetable. And just because he goes untargetable twice when he takes a soul and when he's ulting, and I think that's too much. I think they might have done it for technical reasons, like entering into another champion and then exiting out of a champion and becoming Viego. Maybe for technical reasons and bug reasons, they made it so he's untargetable and basically not a champion for that quarter of a second. But it makes it more frustrating to play against. Other than that, I think his mechanic of taking souls is really unique and super fun to play. I've had a lot of fun playing Viego. I do think his abilities other than that are a little stale. It's like you just kind of hit them and you kind of stun them. His E is really cool though. His E is a really, really good use of invisibility in the game, where a lot of uses of invisibility in the game are kind of toxic and have a bad mechanic. Viego's E invisibility is perfect execution. All right, Azir kind of has its difficulty in the wrong places. I can make a video about difficulty curves and where I think difficulty should lie in champion kits, but Azir is way too hard to pick up and understand where his power comes from. You don't even get that much use out of Azir if you can't even shuffle, and it takes 10 minutes in practice range to learn how to shuffle, which a lot of people don't want to do, to just play, some casual Azir games. But I could talk more about difficulty curves in another video. For Bard, Bard's really cool. He has really good sound and like theme and stuff, but he kind of encourages a weird play style where people are roaming when like they really shouldn't be, just because they're Bard. But Bard's really cool. I mean, he adventures the map to go get orbs, meeps, and uses them to slow you, and his auto attacks are cool. And I love that he can just build any item in the game and it doesn't matter. Fiora is awesome. Her parry ability is sick, but it also leads to some of the hardest counters in the game, like Fiora versus Aatrox. I mean, when you're countered by Fiora, it almost feels helpless. It's like you can't... She's so aggressive and has a gap closer, so you can't really just stay back and farm. And so it kind of feels bad when you're countered by Fiora. But she's super hard to play, but decently easy to pick up, because you are just like auto-attacking people, and it's pretty easy to just like hit a vital. But the stuff that's harder to pull off is you have to practice it, and it's rewarding. So I do think she's up there. Also, max % true health damage. It's kind of bullshit, but only a little bit. Galio is a really cool design, really good theme, really good voiceover, pretty perfect abilities, and his R is epic, and splashy. He's just a little boring and a little too easy to play. I don't think I would change it at all. And I like that he's like anti-magic and that he's Demacian. That makes a lot of sense. I wish more characters like J4 or even Garen were like that. But I wouldn't change him. But he's just a little too easy and boring to be in the top 10. And he's also a little too supportive, so he's not going to apply to so many players, even though he's like a mid laner. It's weird. All right, Gangplank is just a little too hard to play. To get like use out of him, you really got to know how to set up those barrels and how to do that combo. And he's kind of stuck in this state where he's like half a bruiser, but half like this one-shotting melee 80 carry poke champion, which is a unique spot to be in, but he kind of loses his identity. Back to Kayn. Kayn is a cool edgelord. He's the best edgelord in the game. I mean, obviously switching between two different styles of playing, depending on what's easiest to get versus what's the best in the game in the situation, and thinking about the strategy behind that is awesome. Sometimes you can go these like hybrid builds where it doesn't matter what form you get, which is really cool. He can build a lot of different items. He's super flexible. He encourages a completely different jungle play style than a lot of different champions. He's cool. He's just sometimes frustrating to play against, and even though he's literally two-dimensional, like he can be two different characters, once he becomes those characters, he's a little one-dimensional. Like the blue Kayn just stays in a wall and then one-shots you, and the red Kayn, if he gets 2 kills ahead, he just takes infinite damage and doesn't die, and just sits there and hits you with random abilities. But overall, I think Kayn's a really good design. Yeah. So Ivern, I mentioned in the video that he's so unique that he just applies to so few people. And I wouldn't change anything about Ivern. I'm trying to think about it, like, I don't know. I think his bush thing is a little weird, but I think Ivern should be weird. yeah, and it's important as a game designer to make champions that a very few amount of people love a lot, because it's really hard to make a champion that a lot of people love a lot, but it's easier and more consistent to make champions that few people love a lot, if that makes sense. And nobody really hates Ivern. I mean, what type of person are you if you hate Ivern? But yeah, that's Ivern. So for down here, I'm not going to go through all these characters, obviously, but you can kind of see up here, at least until Alistar, like these like 8, those were kind of in consideration, but didn't end up making it. I don't think all of these characters I put in the honorable mentions. I think I just did it at random. But yeah, the rest of them really didn't, like, they went down almost immediately. I knew they weren't going to be in the top 10, so I didn't even consider it. And I'll talk about all of these champions in later videos and discuss them. But yeah, for now, that was the long form for the best champ designs in League. I'll see you in a future video. I don't know what the next topic will be, but should be fun. All right. Subscribe and comment below. I'll try to reply to every comment in the comment section. See ya.